This afternoon, we will have with us Joy Hatchet, the Administrative Associate for Consumer Education and Advocacy Unit of the Maryland Insurance Administration. She is a flood insurance expert, and we are so happy to have her here with us to share with you vital information that you should have about flood insurance, especially during hurricane season when we are exposed to heavy rainfall events and potential flood risk. Please be advised that we are recording this session for sessions 1 and 2. We have uploaded the slide deck to the Prince George's County Department of the Environment's webpage. You should be able to download copies of the slide deck from that webpage. At the end of this session, we will take questions. Should you have any burning questions that come up during Joy's presentation, please feel free to enter those questions in the chat, and we will try to answer as we go along. So with that, Joy, I'd like to turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Dawn. Good afternoon, everyone. As Dawn said, my name is Joy Hatchet, and I work at the Maryland Insurance Administration. And for those of you that don't know, the Maryland Insurance Administration is a state agency. We are the state agency that regulates the business of insurance. We make sure that the insurance companies, the insurance agents, brokers, anyone that engages in the business of insurance complies with all of Maryland laws. My unit is also responsible for trying to help consumers better understand their insurance policies, what they cover, what they don't cover, how to shop for those policies, and how to ask questions to make sure that the policy is performing in the way that you expect. And we do it for all types of insurance: auto, homeowners, life, and health. And so today I'm going to be focusing on flood insurance because, as we all know, hurricane season started at June 1, but we have flooding throughout the year. And so it's really important that you understand flood insurance and make some informed decisions with respect to flood insurance. Next slide, please. So where I like to start is exactly what your homeowner's policy does and doesn't cover when it comes to water damage. So there are some limited things when it comes to water damage that your homeowner's policy will cover. And we'll get to those limited items later. But the most important thing that you need to know is that, as a general rule, homeowners insurance does not cover flooding. Let me repeat that. Your homeowner's insurance does not cover flooding. Next slide, please. So what I have here is I have a slide. You'll find on one side the things that are covered under a homeowner's policy when it comes to water damage, and the things that are covered in terms of water damage on a flood policy. They are very different. So if you have flooding, do not expect your homeowner's policy to cover that. You have to have a separate flood insurance policy. So take a minute and look at the different types of water damage, those that are covered by homeowners, those that are covered by a flood policy. Next slide, please. So what is a flood? Generally speaking, and this is the definition of flood that's actually in the flood policy. It's a general temporary condition of water coming onto your property, and it has to impact two or more areas that are normally dry. So if you have water that is on your property and the road, that could be a general condition of flooding and something that's covered under a flood policy. But if the water is only on your property, then generally that is going to be an issue, and we'd have to look at that to see if there is flood coverage. But it has to be water that has a general condition of flooding. Next slide. So here are some types of, once again, water or earth movement issues that are not covered under your homeowner's policy: earth movement, groundwater seepage, or flooding. But then the question is, well, where can I buy a flood insurance policy? You can go at the bottom of this page to a website called floodsmart.gov, and that will give you a list of insurance agents / producers and insurers that will sell you a flood insurance policy. Next slide. So let's go over some of the basics about flood insurance. So flood insurance that is sold through something called the NFIP, that is the federal program, and any federal program flood insurance policy, all of them look essentially alike. They have $250,000 worth of coverage for the building. And that's all you're going to find in that particular policy. Now, you may also want to purchase coverage for your contents, your personal property. You have to buy a separate contents policy to go with the structural policy. So if you only buy a structural policy, all you're going to get is coverage for things like the walls, the floors, and insulation. If you want a policy to cover your stuff, then you also have to purchase a contents policy. But notice the limits. For the structural policy, you can only get $250,000 worth of coverage. For your contents, you can only get $100,000 worth of coverage. Those are important things to note, and later on in this presentation, I will tell you how to get additional coverage if you happen to need it. Next slide. So there are limits with what is covered under a flood policy. A lot of people basically are used to your homeowner's policy, where you buy one policy, it covers the structure and your stuff. And there's some limits, but the limits on a flood policy are much more prevalent. First and foremost, there's a limit on what's covered that's housed in the basement. And the reason for that is when you think about it, if your home gets flooded, most of the water is going to go down. So if you've got things in the basement, that's what's going to get ruined. And remember, this is a federal government policy. So it's only going to cover the essential things to have that home work. So look at this slide. You'll see it's very limited items that are going to be covered. When it comes to what's not covered, it's a long list of things. And this is what I tell people to think about. So if you want your basement to be your television room or the kids' room where you can put all of their stuff down there, if it's in the basement and you have flooding, your flood insurance policy isn't going to cover those things. So just be mindful of what you put in that basement. And a lot of people deal with that by either putting things up on stilts, putting shelves in, or just making sure that there's nothing of great value in your basement. Next slide, please. Also, in order for there to be coverage, there has to be direct physical loss of the water to the structure or your items. So if the water never, let's say you've got cabinets and you've got cabinets on the bottom and you've got cabinets on the top, you have flooding. The water touches the cabinets on the bottom, but it never touches the top cabinets. That flood policy is only going to cover items that the water actually damaged. So then you may say, well, but these are special cabinets, and that means that the bottom won't and the top won't match. Honestly, the flood policy doesn't care. They're only going to cover items where there's a direct physical loss. Next slide. So take a look at this list of things that basically lays out the things that your policy will cover. I mean, and it is an extensive list. Things like your furnace and your water heaters, which tend to be pricey things, damage to the foundation, fuel tanks. Take a look at these things because these are the types of things that your flood policy will cover. Next slide. And then here's a list if you purchase contents coverage. Here's a list of some of the things that would be covered under that contents policy. But remember, the water has actually had to damage those things. Sometimes, okay, here's a perfect example. Curtains are on the list. Well, if water touches the curtains, but the curtains can be washed, generally speaking, your flood policy is not going to cover that because there's not been any true damage. Next slide. And then once again, this is what isn't covered. And let me give you an example. So with your homeowner's insurance policy, you have the option of buying something called water, sewer, backup. And that's basically water that comes into your home through a drain that would normally take the water out of your home. So if that is actually water sewer backup, then that's going to be something that's going to be covered under a homeowner's policy versus a flood policy. But here's where it gets tricky. Sometimes, if there's such a large amount of water that comes in, you may have water that comes in and backs up, but you also may have water that comes underneath the door and causes flooding. And then you have something called concurrent causation. And depending on which occurred first or what the actual damage and what the loss is, that's going to determine which policy, if either, will cover that. And those are the ones that get a bit tricky. Next slide. So once again, here's some things that, generally speaking, aren't covered by flood insurance. That said, over the next few months, there are going to be some changes to what's covered by flood insurance. So this first item, additional living expenses, stay tuned, because that actually in the next few months may be something that would be covered by flood insurance. But right now, it still is not. But coming at some point in the future, it may. And one of the big questions that we get are people that have piers, and the pier is damaged in flood waters. Generally speaking, that is not going to be something that's going to be covered by flood insurance. We actually have a consumer advisory on our website that speaks to that point. Next slide. Who can buy flood insurance? I can't tell you how many times someone comes up either during one of these presentations or at an event that I'm at, and they say, well, somebody Exit Y and Z told me that because I don't live in a special hazard flood zone, I can't purchase flood insurance. That is absolutely incorrect. Just about every homeowner in the state of Maryland, every renter, every condominium owner, every business owner can purchase flood insurance. And I would say to you, if you go to someone and they say you can't buy it, try a different agent. Go to that website I just gave you, floodsmart.gov, and they can help you find an agent to purchase a policy. Next slide. Where can I purchase it? As I just stated, floodsmart.gov, but also talk to the company, the agent that sold you your homeowner's policy. There are some insurance agents and insurance companies that not only sell homeowners insurance, but also sell flood insurance. So give your homeowners insurance company a call and ask them, do you sell the NFIP flood policy? Next slide. So there are some other options that are available. So we talked, and we've been talking all along about the NFIP federal government policy. But remember, I said that it had a limit of $250,000. So if your home is worth $350,000, what do you do about that extra $100,000? Well, one choice is to buy what's called excess coverage. So you buy the basic flood policy through the NFIP, and you buy the extra $100,000 worth of coverage from the private market. And you can find a list of all the companies that sell in the private market at that link that's here. Or you can go into the private market and decide to buy your entire policy from the private market. And the link that I'm giving you here gives you all of that information. And the good thing about the private market is we at the Insurance Administration, we regulate that. But then you have another option. That is the surplus lines market. And basically, people will go to the surplus lines market to purchase insurance that they can't purchase anyplace else. So there are going to be some places that, because of the location, or sometimes because of the type of home, be it the age, the way it's built, it's going to be hard for you to find coverage in the private market. So you can go to the surplus lines market and buy it. But we tell people, if you make the decision to go to the surplus lines market, please note that we at the Insurance Administration have very limited authority. So while we may think that what that particular surplus lines company has done is incorrect, we may not be able to order them to do anything about it. Next slide. So here's some facts, and pay close attention to that, to these specific facts, because a lot of people don't realize the power of water. So essentially, flood damage is probably one of the greatest risks that you can come encounter with every day. And people will think, well, I don't live right beside a river or a stream. These days, we are having lots of very heavy rain. And as we've seen over the years, if you are inundated, if the ground's been dry, and then all of a sudden you're inundated with water, that can cause flooding. So it's important to know that. Also, there's a very good chance that over the course of a 30-year mortgage, there's probably about a 25% chance that your home will be flooded. So think about that. Also, based on statistics, your home is more likely to flood than it is to be damaged by a fire. The power of water. An inch of water can cause $20,000 or more of damage. And people say, well, I don't have to worry about that because the federal government or the state or the county is going to come in and pay for my damage. Not so fast. First of all, the federal government comes in only in limited circumstances. And usually there's a long, even if they come in, there's going to be a long delay for there to be any money. And the amount of money that they're going to pay on claims is going to be very limited. We all have seen that the state, while the state would love to be able to help its citizens, there's not a lot of money there. And the localities just as well. There are all of these competing things that they have to take care of. So they're not going to be able to pay for your damage. Basically, you're responsible for your own self and making sure that you are protected and can take care of your needs after a flooding event. Next slide. And so here are a few more facts. As I mentioned, don't let someone tell you you can't buy flood insurance. And also, if it can rain at your house, there's a chance that it can flood at your house. So you just need to make an informed decision as to whether or not flood insurance is something that you need to purchase. Next slide. And this is the contact information for my agency, also the contact information for the National Flood Insurance Program. And I would encourage you to visit our website. We've got lots of information on flood insurance. We have videos, brochures, all types of information to help you be a more informed consumer. So thank you all very much. And I think at this point, we'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Joy. Feel free to come off mic and ask questions that you might have of Joy regarding flood insurance. I do have one question for you, Joy. If someone does not have flood insurance at this point and they want to purchase flood insurance just for that extra coverage, especially now that we're in hurricane season, do we still have 30 to 60 days average for the timing of getting a policy approved and in place?
So here's the thing. If you want to purchase a flood insurance policy, there's a 30-day wait time. And that's basically to make sure that people aren't waiting for it to they hear about the hurricane coming and then they can't rush out and buy flood insurance. That said, there are a few exceptions if the person is in the process of buying a home, and they should reach out to their agent or probably their lender and look into whether or not there's something that can be done about that 30-day period. But generally speaking, if you're an existing homeowner and you wake up and you say, gosh, I listened to this great presentation by the Maryland Insurance Administration, I want a policy. Generally speaking, you've got to go ahead and start filling out the application, but that policy will not be effective until 30 days.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a second question, and this is probably a question for NFIP because I know it gets kind of complicated, but if a property owner has a residence that's outside of that special flood hazard area, typically their premium is lower than it would be if that property was in a special flood hazard area.
Generally speaking, yes, but as you know, Dawn, the NFIP is going through some renovations and redoing how they calculate that premium. So the best thing a person can do is get in touch with and go on that floodsmart.gov website and talk to one of their professionals, and they can actually give a quote as to how much the policy will cost. Generally speaking, though, you are correct. It's all about risk. So if your property isn't in an area that's as susceptible to risk, then the policy should cost less.
Mm-hmm.
A question, but I think Ashley was first.
Yes.
Go ahead, Ashley. You can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. So 2 questions. First being just trying to clarify. I was on a session, this was years ago, with another agency, and there was discussion about flood insurance for communities. And if the community as a whole, decided, hey, we want to come together and purchase flood insurance, then there were some incentives, and perhaps the flood insurance may be lowered based on the number of people who buy into that insurance program. So I was just curious if you all have any information on that. Again, this is something years ago.
So I'm not sure, but what you're probably referring to is something called community rating. And if communities did certain things, and one of those things was to get enough participants within the community to buy a flood policy, but the community has to do things like keeping, and there have to be improvements and whatnot, then the community would be able to get certain discounts. Dawn, who in Prince George's could Ashley speak to about that to find out whether or not where she lives in that particular community?
Yeah, we don't, hi, Ashley. Thank you for joining us today. To the best of my knowledge, the county does not, well, let me back up a little bit. We do have a risk management office that I probably could consult with regarding that community type insurance coverage. But in general, we don't have the insurance experts in the county government. Anything flood related, we typically refer it back to FEMA or the National Flood Insurance Program. Yeah, so I'm really unfamiliar with that. The community, what is it called again, Joy? Community?
It was community rating, which basically communities had to do certain things in order to decrease the
Okay. Yeah,
amount that
I got
anyone
you.
in the community would pay.
Okay, yeah, so
So
you're
it wasn't a joint policy. It was just
okay.
like particular actions.
Okay, this is actually Lalantha, one of Lalantha's programs that he oversees. This is the community rating system. Yeah, yeah. And under the community rating system, Prince George's County residents are eligible to receive up to a 25% discount due to the programs and services which the county offers, which are over and beyond what's required by the NFIP. So yeah, and I typically, Lalantha, chime in here. I typically remind residents to look on their policies to see if you're getting a discount for the county's participation in the community rating system. And if your discount is lower than 25%, then you should follow up with your agent. If it's non-existent on your policy or it's less than 25%, I recommend that residents follow up with their agent to advise them of the county's rating.
And Ashley, that 25%, that's a big deal. So if you're thinking about talking and trying to get a flood policy, make sure that the agent knows that you reside in Prince George's County and that they do have this 25% discount.
Okay, will do. I appreciate that clarity. Thank you so much. A lot of good information here. It made me think about all the contents in our basement of 30 years worth of stuff and what needs just to be thrown out and what needs to be elevated or removed from the basement. So thank you again. And last question. So regarding the contents to be covered, I recall in one of the slides, it was mentioned an example of artwork and perhaps some furs up, and it said up to $2,500. So would that be $2,500 for the artwork?
All of it.
All of it. Okay, all of got it. I kind of figured that.
Yeah. Just like for jewelry, you may, under your homeowner's policy, you may have $1,000 worth of coverage. That's not per piece. It's for all of it.
Okie doke. Thank you so much.
And I guess you might want to insure those separately in other riders or through other companies relative to your furs, for example. But I did have a question.
But if you insure the furs and whatnot separately, make sure that the policy you purchase covers damage from flooding. Because frequently people will get riders to cover things like their furs and their art. But generally those riders are to cover things like fire, not flooding.
Right.
Just be careful.
Yeah, I have a separate policy with a separate entity that covers, for example, the furs and the art. But I appreciate that. And your presentation has been excellent. I had a follow-up question similar to Ashley's. It was regarding content coverage. And there was another slide I thought you mentioned. I couldn't remember that area, and I don't think I wrote it down, but you said wait a bit of time and the flood insurance may cover it. What was that item that you mentioned? You're on mute, Ms. Hatchet. Ms. Hatchet, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Additional living expenses. So under your homeowner's policy, if your home is damaged and you can't reside there, homeowners insurance generally covers finding you an apartment or renting you a place to stay. Flood insurance right now does not cover that.
Mm.
However, what they are looking at changing, and they've been talking about that for some time, is because that's an important thing, because you need a place to go. And so they are in the process of making some revisions so that flood insurance will cover that. It's called additional living expenses.
And you're saying most policies don't now cover it, but they
Flood insurance, homeowners insurance generally covers it. A flood insurance policy that is issued by the NFIP, the federal government, because remember, you can buy your policy from the federal government, you can buy it from the private market, or you can buy it from the surplus lines market. If you buy it from the federal government, right now, additional living expenses are not covered. Those private market policies, I would say you need to really look at the policy language because some of them may cover it. The surplus line, since we don't regulate that, I would once again say look at the policy language to see if they cover it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen.
Hi, Joy. I have a question. One of your slides said, well, this is the definition of a standard definition of flood in a standard flood insurance policy. It says 2 or more acres of normally dry land or 2 or more properties. Where does the 2 or more properties, is there a basis for using the 2 or more? No.
Yeah, that is by law. That is written in the federal code. It says 2 or more. Now, I have seen what they've done, and I think I use this as an example. The or more could be a street. So it could be the piece of property that your home is on and a street. And also the 2 properties don't have to be adjacent. So you could be in a neighborhood, your property is damaged, your next door neighbor is not, and the neighbor one or over is, that will be considered a general condition of flooding.
Okay, so it has to be two separate, I guess, parcels, tax parcels.
Correct. Well, I mean, and I don't necessarily consider a road a tax parcel, but
Right,
but
different ownership. Okay.
yes, yes.
But if you are on a large lot and you live on a lot that's more than 2 acres, then it could just be, then you qualify under that 2 or more acres condition.
And what I say is, if that happens, you may end up having to fight for it, because there may be a dispute as to, okay, is this or is not, but you definitely have an argument, especially if you've got this huge piece of land, and you are the only owner of the land. Generally speaking, that should be under the definition, but I could also see that that might be challenged. So that would be one of the questions that I would ask when I'm purchasing the policy. So here's my land. If the only piece of land that's damaged in flooding is my land, is this going to be covered? And then make sure that you get that in writing.
Okay, that's good to know. Especially if you live on a small lot, then you might have to go around your neighborhood and see if anyone else got some flood damage.
And I've seen it happen where it basically not every, you would think, okay, well, the neighbor's property flooded too. Not all the time, just because of the lay
Right.
and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I see it all the time. Not all the time, but I see it with some degree of frequency.
All right, thank you.
I have another question for you, Jackie, and I'm sorry, Joy. In Prince George's County, we've had several events in which folks who park their vehicles on the street have experienced destructive flooding for their vehicles. I guess it's flood insurance that, I mean, I guess it's vehicle insurance that
it's your auto insurance, but you have to have full coverage. So if a lot of people, if the vehicle gets old or they paid off the loan, they drop full coverage and they only have liability coverage, which is coverage that the law says you have to have in case you cause an accident. So if you've decided to drop full coverage and only have liability coverage and your car gets flooded, you have no recourse.
Oh, wow. Now, suppose the car is in an attached garage. Can they get
the damage to the garage, the structure may be covered under the flood insurance policy, but not the coverage to the car.
Okay, so it wouldn't be considered content.
No.
I'm
Now,
sorry, say it again.
Where it gets tricky is with people that have those antique cars in those garages, but that would be a battle. And I, being the betting woman that I'm not, I would say the federal government's not going to pay for that antique car.
But a private insurer may well, depending on what the policy says.
You have to
Right.
talk to the private insurer, because generally speaking, they get real. It's one thing when it's a structure. It's a whole nother thing when it's a vehicle.
That's interesting. So you said if the contents, the antique car is in the garage, that's not contents that would be covered by the,
No,
but the homeowner's insurance might,
no. I mean, I don't want to say no, definitely.
unless you have a
But-
rider.
Well, first of all, if you've got an antique car, a regular auto policy is probably not going to cover it anyway. You'd have to have a separate, very specific policy that's written for antique vehicles, and those generally cost a little bit more. I would say the best way to make sure that if that vehicle is in a garage and damaged by water, that there's coverage there, ask in advance and get it in writing, because that's
Okay,
too iffy.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen a number of people lose their vehicles past several years due to
That's terrible.
flooding. Yeah.
And people don't think about it. I mean, they think, oh, well, I dropped this coverage and it ended up saving me money. And that's great. I mean, we all need to make decisions. But if you only have liability coverage, I mean, it doesn't have to be a flood. If you only have liability coverage and a tree falls on your car, you're out of luck.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a hard one. Lilantha, I remember you mentioned at the beginning of the session that a resident had a question of us in session 1 about flood insurance. So we already asked her question.
Yeah, her question was, I don't think she's here today. Her question was that she had heard one of her mortgage company personnel had told her that even if she had flood insurance, she would only be covered if the federal government declares what federal disaster.
That's incorrect.
Yeah, so we told her as much.
Your national flood insurance program policy is a contract. It's a contract that covers you and pays for damage. Their payment is not contingent on the federal government, the state, or the locality declaring it a disaster. There are times when there's nothing that's declared a disaster. You just happen to be misfortunate enough to have heavy rain in your neighborhood. If you have a flood policy and there's a general condition of flooding and something's damaged to either the structure or the contents, the flood policy will pay.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, we told her more or less something along those lines. When kind of a follow-up question, when it is declared a federal disaster, and the payments are not anywhere as good as the up to 250,000, right? That's the other thing.
Generally speaking, even if it's a disaster and the federal government gives money to consumers, I can't remember the exact number. I think it's around 6,000. It may be as much as sometimes $10,000. But how is that going to help you rebuild your home? You've lost your most valuable asset. And don't get me wrong, that $6,000 or $10,000 is helpful, but it's not going to rebuild your home. And also the amount of time it takes to get that check. It's not a matter of days or weeks. It's usually months.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, when you hear in the media 20 million assistance, but you forget the fact that it's going to be divided amongst gazillion people because
And also a lot of times what you hear in the media is the 20 million, but they don't tell you that it's not just divided up amongst the people. It's to repair the roads, the infrastructure. So it's a lot. That money from the federal government pays for lots of things. And so, and these days it's fewer and fewer things.
Mm. Yeah. So I guess the real point is that you will receive some reimbursement, but it won't be enough to make you whole again, right? So there.
Nowhere
And
close enough.
it's not necessarily that you will receive, you may receive.
Oh boy.
Because there's even if there's a federal disaster, there's no guarantee that you're going to get anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, but it's better to have that flood insurance to at least put you in that place where you're eligible to
Yes.
receive
Yeah.
than having no other options than your own bank account, yes, or loans. Loans, yeah. Like we want to see more loans. Okay, I don't think we have any further questions.
Nothing in the chat.
Nothing in the chat. I think everyone was able to ask their own questions. So Joy, I do want to thank you for joining us this afternoon and providing excellent advice and sharing excellent information with our residents and our team. It helps us to have a better understanding of the insurance processes and procedures when we receive those questions from our residents. Typically, as Lilantha has mentioned, we do refer many insurance related questions on to the NFIP or other FEMA offices for the experts to address for us. But I do thank you for helping us bring this information to our residents. And one parting question is, are there any particular type of insurance questions that we should be addressing to your agency as opposed to FEMA, or we'll just stick with FEMA?
It's totally up to you. You can always send folks to us. We have a very good relationship with folks at the NFIP. So either way, I mean, and then they refer folks to us, we refer folks to them.
Okay.
A lot of times people don't know. And this is something that I also tell people. If you don't know, ask.
Yeah. 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 And there's no harm in asking, right? You'll get information from the appropriate specialists. I do have one question in the chat from Mr. Webster, who indicated, will there be handouts or information available later? Yes, Mr. Webster, we, Department of the Environment with Prince George's County, will post a copy of the presentation in the slide deck to our webpage at you can find it on the Prince George's County Government webpage, Department of the Environment. So we'll have that material available early next week, if not by the end of this week, but definitely early next week. Okay. All right. And please feel free to take a photo of this screen that provides the contact information for the Maryland Insurance Administration or the National Flood Insurance Program. They welcome questions about insurance. And Lilantha, I think we can move on to the next page.
Do you see, what page do you see, Dawn?
Contact information.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to go back to that for that last person who had a question. And you could also, if you still have questions for the county, since I think you mentioned you joined late, jot down DOE CARES, DOECARES, DOE CARES at co.pg.md.us. I know that's a mouthful. I can put that on the chat. Just pose a
Okay.
question, and we can address, assist you offline.
Yeah, I just added it, Lilantha, DOE.
Okay.
Oh,
This is our last slide.
all right, the last slide. I think I forgot the at. The last slide is our next slide for the next session, Lilantha.
Yes. Do you see that on the screen?
No, it froze. But I will go on to say that
Oh.
we will have our last session, session 4, next Thursday at 12 noon. This session is devoted to the topic of disaster response and recovery. It will be brought to us by our our Office of Homeland Security at Prince George's County Government. So we look forward to having you join us for next Thursday. That will be our final flood education session. So we look forward to hearing from you. Please let others know to join us for that session. And again, we will have a copy or post our presentations and our slide deck for each session to the to our webpage at Department of the Environment for Prince George's County. Thank you again. Thank you, Joy, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.